This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast, the show that unpacks fantasy, faith, and life. I'm Bryce Johnson with Harrison Zuckerberg. We are your fantasy coaches here to encourage you and help you win while also finding meaning and purpose throughout the fantasy season. We won't always be right, but we hope we'll be convincing as we provide fantasy advice and biblical encouragement. I'm coming to you from the Unpacking It Ministry studio in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we are fired up to be here as we discuss week 8 in the NFL season and the fantasy ramifications as we look toward week 9. And today on the show, we will do some fantasy shenanigans. We'll do accountability. I mentioned a couple running backs the last 2 weeks. We'll talk about both of those running backs. And today we'll do I'm Convinced. I've got 2 more running backs for you that I'm convinced about. So stick around for that. We will look at the waiver wire, let you know whether players are legit or not, and tell you who to pick up on the waivers this week. We always kick off our show with the breakout topic. And this week it's called Making the Leap. So we will do that in just a moment. Before we do, I do want to encourage you to check out the Unpacking It raffle that we have going on right now. It is an online raffle. You can get one raffle ticket for $25, or you can get, I think it's 5 for, let's see, how many is it? 25 for 100. How about that? So 25 raffle tickets for $100. And so you support Unpacking It, you support Fantasy Football Fellowship. And so if you notice, if you're watching this, the background behind me no longer has jerseys. We are raffling those jerseys off. Signed by fantasy stud Kenneth Walker, Panther great Luke Kuechly, and then a couple others as well. DeAndre Swift, who's having a great season for the Eagles. So plus other experiences for sports fans. Check it out. The link is in the show notes, or if you're watching on social media, we'll post that link as well. So click on that. That raffle ends on Friday. So I encourage you to support that, be a part of that, and maybe you'll win. You could be a winner. So should be a lot of fun. All right, let's begin with this week's breakout. And it's about making the leap. And I'll talk about a couple players that have made that leap in just a moment. But when we draft our teams every year, part of our strategy is, yes, you want to draft consistent players, solid players, veterans that have proven it year after year. So you try to snag as many of those guys as you can. Then you take a look at, okay, who's ready for a breakout? Who are some of those guys poised to take the next step, to make the leap? These are maybe third-year wide receivers or second-year running backs that are stepping into kind of more of an opportunity. So we fill our rosters with those guys. Then we also draft some rookies, knowing that we may have to be patient with those guys. They may not burst onto the scene week 1, but maybe by week 7, 8, 9, toward the end of the season, those rookies can be key contributors on our team. And so all those players, we want a balanced roster, but when it comes to the players that are young and unproven, we want them and we anticipate them becoming the kind of players that will produce in fantasy. And so we expect them to take that next step in their development. And so throughout the season, we're looking for guys, okay, are they making progress? Are they growing? Are they getting better? And so here's a great example of this. This year, I drafted Jahmyr Gibbs in 2 of my important leagues. And early in the season, we saw glimpses of it. We go, wow, this guy's got great potential. He's going to be really good for Detroit. It took some time. But hopefully, if you listen to the show, you were patient with me that we waited. A few weeks ago, we talked about patience, the importance of patience, and we saw that with Gibbs. Well, now the last couple of weeks, what has Jahmyr Gibbs done? He has had a breakout. He is showing what he's capable of. He is now producing huge fantasy numbers. And so I'm excited. I hope you're excited, but he's made the leap. He has stepped into the player that he's capable of being. And we are seeing that on full display. And you go across kind of the NFL, and and you look at some of the young wide receivers that are taking the next step this season. Even CeeDee Lamb in recent weeks has really made the leap into an elite wide receiver, putting up huge numbers for Dallas. And so as fantasy managers, we're always excited when we finally see our guys take the step, make the jump. And especially if we've been patient with certain guys and we've seen the progress, seen the process, and then man, there it goes. Wow, things are clicking. And so it there's a certain understanding that growth and maturity on the football field does take time. And they sometimes on our teams, they're on our bench. Then maybe we put them in our flex spot. Then we put them in that starting spot. And the fantasy points start to reflect that. And we see it. And so when we parallel this to our own lives, some of us, we're all at different points in our faith journey. Some of us are new to faith. We're taking our first steps with Jesus. Some of us are veterans. We've been following Jesus for a long time. But really, in either case, there is consistent. This is the case for everybody. There is consistent growth, maturity, faith building that takes place our whole lives. And so the question for us today, though, is, are we seeing progress? Are we seeing the breakthroughs? Are we seeing growth and maturity? Are we kind of becoming who God created us to be, who we're capable of being? We're capable of being like Jahmyr Gibbs, right? But are we becoming that? And ultimately, God is the one working in us, and His Holy Spirit working in us. And so that's where how growth happens. But for us, are we seeking the Lord? Are we reading God's word? Are we surrounding ourselves with people that are going to help us grow? And are we seeing consistent maturity and growth in our lives? Or are we like one of these players that we drafted with all this hope and excitement and potential, and they haven't gotten any better? We've been, you hate to throw somebody under the bus, but Kadarius Toney with the Chiefs, we keep waiting and waiting. It's like, it's time, man. It's time. You're in the Chiefs offense. What are you doing? We want to see more out of you. There's so much potential there, but it's not happening. And it's like, hey, man, this is, you've been in this is your second year now. It's go time. Your second team now. It's go time. But he hasn't taken that leap yet. And so are we more like Kadarius Toney, where we haven't taken the leap yet? And it's kind of time. It's like, let's go. Or are we, experiencing the fruit in our lives as it's constant growth, and we're so hungry to become more and more like Jesus, and understanding God's word even more, and we're growing in knowledge and understanding. And so here are a couple verses to consider today. 1 Corinthians 14:20 says, brothers and sisters, do not be children, immature, childlike in your thinking. Be infants in matters of evil, completely innocent and inexperienced, but in your minds be mature adults. And so are we still like, the young player that just doesn't know what's going on, hasn't, figured things out yet, and he's staying in that spot? And it's like, hey, it's been a couple years now. Or are we like the player that's becoming, the veteran, we're seeing the production, we're seeing the growth. So we want to be mature. We want to be mature in our faith, mature in our character, mature in our understanding of God's word. And so Hebrews 5:12-14, it says, in fact, though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's word all over again. You need milk, not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. So are we still at this kind of starting point? Now, some people are at the starting point and they're beginning the journey. But I'm talking to people that have been in the journey for a while, yet they're still sort of at the starting point. They're still just trying to understand things. And it's, man, we've got so much opportunity to really grow and experience fruit, but we have to take the steps toward God, with God, and as we grow, we start to understand the difference between good and evil. We start making wiser decisions. And so, just like we talk about these players, they're not making the same, fumbles, turnovers like they used to. They've grown. They're getting better. And now they're producing for our fantasy team. And so are we producing fruit for the kingdom? And we're at the point of now teaching others about Jesus and telling others about him and making disciples. And so that's the level that we want to continue to grow into and get to and make the leap. Make the leap in our spiritual journey. Just like some of these fantasy players were excited or making the leap in the NFL season. So there you go. Make the leap. That's the encouragement for us today. Let's not remain status quo. Let's continue to grow. All right. So as we dive into today's fantasy talk, I hope that you'll think about that kind of spiritual encouragement today. We also want to help you win in fantasy football. And so we begin kind of recapping week 8 and some of the fantasy shenanigans that took place. So here we go.
Fantasy shenanigans.
All right, let's say hello to Harrison Zuckerberg joining the show today. Harrison, great to see you, man. How you doing? What jumps out from week 8? What were some of the shenanigans you experienced?
For me, the biggest fantasy shenanigans were players who I weren't relying on stealing touches and stealing points from players who I needed to score big in other leagues. I went 2-2 this week, and in 2 leagues, I scored around 170 points on both of those teams. And then in my 2 losses, I scored 111 and 119. But the biggest problem was on the teams that were playing incredible, I had guys like Gus Edwards in my starting lineup where you're like, oh my God, incredible. Gus Edwards, 3rd touchdown of the day. But I really needed that 3rd touchdown of the day to instead go to Mark Andrews on the team that was losing by 4 points. I was like, no, not another Gus Edwards touchdown, please. Or CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks. The team that had CeeDee Lamb was already up by 50 points and was going to win the game easily.
That's
like,
right.
I don't need an 11th catch for CeeDee Lamb. Please throw the ball to someone else. I'm down by 2 in another league and I need it.
Yep.
So that was the biggest fantasy shenanigans where you're so torn of, you're happy when your players are performing well, but the players on the wrong teams are performing well. Let's spread the love a little bit. I don't need a 50-point game from CD and then a 12-point game from Brandon Cooks. How about we go like 25 each? That would be nice.
That's only fair. It's only fair. Yeah, what a performance for Lamb. Of course, I win against him. Here's the shenanigans. During the week, there was a big trade between a team that was down at the bottom of the standings to a guy at the top of the standings who was my opponent this week. And this guy traded all his kind of average players for CeeDee Lamb. And then I got to face CeeDee Lamb. It was a nightmare. So that was a tough loss for me, but kind of a mixed bag for me. I'm still fine. Most teams are still in position to make a deep run, which I'm excited about. And really one of the surprises for me from week 8 was, wait, no one was on bye. There were no buys. So week 8, no buys. Now, so we were dealing with that for a few weeks. We get a break from that. And so I will identify a couple of my teams like, at full strength, I'm not sure I like where we're at full strength. So I got to tweak a couple rosters in that regard. And so now we get back into buy concerns and my boy Jahmyr Gibbs has a big week. And then of course he goes on buy. So that was unfortunate. The other thing, the Thursday night game is always a nightmare, right? It's always a nightmare for one reason or the next. For me, I wasn't willing to put Gabe Davis in the starting lineup. And of course, he goes off, has a monster game for the Bills, coming off a couple bad games. So he looked a lot better, but he was on my bench. And then Darren Waller. So he was questionable all week. He gets the start, and then he quickly goes down early. And I will say that normally, I do not like playing questionable players. I usually lean towards sitting them out because I don't like that thing to happen where, all right, they play and then they go out early. So Joshua Palmer, I did not play him. Questions all week. I sat him on the bench. Fine. But the tight end position, it's usually thin. Oftentimes I only carry one tight end. Darren Waller's my guy. That was a big miss for me. So I missed out on that. That was a bummer. And then the other thing that was crazy this week, Patrick Mahomes being sick, he plays, doesn't play well. And then on the flip side, Russell Wilson, 3 touchdowns. Are you kidding me? And the fool's gold of that, though, is 114 passing yards. So this still isn't a great offense passing the ball. I still see the concerns there, but a couple of his guys got into the end zone, and it was a big day for Russell Wilson. So anything else of note from week 8?
No, I mean, like you said, it's really difficult right now because we are in sort of the home stretch of what are you going to do to prepare yourselves to either get a playoff spot or then win once you're in the playoffs if you started out the season really well. And it's a telling time because there's a lot of bye week coming up this week and for the rest of the season. And you really have to evaluate, what does my team look like at full strength? I may be able to win these games this week, but that's because I was going against the guy who has Christian McCaffrey on bye.
That's right.
When playoff time comes and no one's on bye, how do I actually stand within the league?
Yes, that's a great point. And I think that's key because we sometimes fool ourselves into thinking, oh, yeah, I'm doing well. That's because it was a matchup situation. And we do this in the NFL too. We start buying certain teams. Oh, they're going to be great. No, it was a matchup. They played well against that team. Even as a Panthers fan, let's pump the brakes. We beat the Texans. Barely. It's easy now. All right, we'll take the win though. We're excited. The one last thing from a shenanigans standpoint, there were a few of these situations, some vultures or guys that scored touchdowns and then they were taken off the board in that Houston game. How about Texans fullback Andrew Beck steals one from Dameon Pierce? So the fullback gets in there after Pierce had scored, and then it got taken away. So that's always frustrating. I got at least a text about that from a Dameon Pierce owner. I think we already saw a comment here today as well on the show. So Dameon Pierce, man, tough season for managers of that have him on their roster. It's been discouraging for sure. The Texans overall kind of had a tough offensive output for sure as well. All right, let's jump into some accountability and confession, and we sort of loop in or combine the things we got right, the things we got wrong from the past week, and things that we've said on this show. And so speaking of the Texans, Nico Collins, I'm all in on him this year, and that was a disappointing game for him, especially coming off a monster week the week before. 4 catches, 30 yards. But the biggest thing I've got to just admit or acknowledge, I don't have enough of the rookie tight ends on my rosters. And I bought the narrative that rookie tight ends can't produce. And the stats have shown that's been a concern over the years. But we have to continue to adapt to the way the NFL is changing and the fact that the Travis Kelce effect, big-time players are playing tight end or developing, or teams in college are utilizing tight ends and developing them to become ready for the NFL. And so this year, Trey McBride, Arizona, are you kidding me? 10 catches, 95 yards, and a touchdown. He's sitting on the waiver wire in one league, and I could have gotten him last week. I should have done it. What was I doing? I just wrote off the Cardinals. Come on, man. It was a dumb decision. So I'm kicking myself for that. And then, I'm so bummed I don't have Sam Laporta on any teams. He's been lighting it up for Detroit. Don't worry. I got Michael Mayer on the bench. Get him out of here. He did nothing last night for the Raiders. The Raiders did nothing last night. So that was a big miss for me. There was one other rookie tight end that's been doing well. I've got Musgrave from the Packers. He did nothing this week. But then there was another rookie tight end that had a good week as well that I missed out on. So that's unfortunate. What else do you need to admit today?
Well, you already mentioned it, Trey McBride. Last week, I said that he was not legit and you should not go pick him up. I was wrong about that. He stepped into the tight end 1 role and was absolutely incredible in Arizona. I'm still a little bit skeptical because we've seen this with Michael Wilson and we've seen this with a lot of other people in Arizona where they have this one crazy week, everyone rushes out to get them, and then they're not so good the next week. But Trey McBride looks legit. He looks like someone who should be rostered in fantasy and possibly even started depending on what the matchup is.
Absolutely. And then the other rookies, Dalton Kincaid looked great Thursday night for Buffalo. And then even Jake Ferguson got involved a little bit more with Dallas. So, these rookies are coming in and contributing. So a couple of these guys are league winners, I think. We'll see. We got to see a couple more weeks, but there's some potential there. especially with some injuries. Talk about Waller, talk about Pat Freiermuth, those kind of guys not getting it done. And of course, Zach Ertz went out, which opened up the door for McBride. All right, one other thing I need to confess. I whiffed on how I responded to Washington, the Commanders, because this week, leading into the game against Philadelphia, this unbelievable Eagles defensive line, they're so good. We never hear the end of it. They trade for Byard and all this stuff. I dropped Jahan Dotson. I dropped Sam Howell. I dropped Antonio Gibson. I benched Brian Robinson. And then I picked up Chris Rodriguez. I mean, whiff. What in the world? Howell, 4 touchdowns, 397. Dotson, 8 receptions and a touchdown. And then actually a player that I do love is Jamison Crowder. He goes 7 catches, 95 yards and a touchdown, kind of out of the blue. Not sure you go rush to the waiver wire, but he'll have these games every once in a while. He's a pretty good player when given the opportunity. But I don't know. I didn't have a good grasp of Washington, so I missed on that. But to redeem myself, last week on the show, I was convinced about Cam Akers. It's Cam Akers time. Well, we got a glimpse of it. It's only going to get better, people. It's going to get better. He got into the end zone. I did my little celebration in my recliner on Sunday. I was all excited. He ended up not getting a lot of volume yet, but the Vikings are unraveling. They might as well utilize Cam Akers. They're going to have to rely more on the run game. So Akers will be good, but he goes 9 for 19 and a touchdown. And I still think he's getting more and more incorporated into that offense. I mean, Madison, he rushed 16 times for 31 yards. He's clearly not the answer. So give the ball to Akers a little bit more. Anything else to confess today, Harrison?
Yeah, so last week I said that George Pickens was going to be a breakout for the rest of the season. And I still have hope, but last week, 1 catch. It did go for 22 yards and a touchdown, so it wasn't terrible, but that's not what you want to see out of a guy who you're starting in your fantasy lineup every week. Kenny Pickett's now hurt, and this may sound a little crazy, but I actually think the breakout potential is higher with Mitch Trubisky as George Pickens' quarterback than Kenny Pickett, because Kenny Pickett just loves to check it down over and over again, doesn't look downfield. Mitch Trubisky, for better or for worse, will take chances downfield. So hopefully he can target Pickett on some of the deep balls and get it to him. I don't know if they'll actually be completions, but at least we'll get some deep targets with Mitch Trubisky. We'll see what happens in the Thursday night game. And then one thing that I was right about from 2 weeks ago was I said, don't drop Chuba Hubbard. When the Panthers come off bye, it's not Chuba starting just because Miles Sanders is injured. Chuba is going to be the guy when he comes back. Chuba Hubbard absolutely led the backfield and carries there. Granted, it was not for a good fantasy day, but he is the RB1 in Carolina. No question about it. I'm not sure what they're going to do with Miles Sanders, considering they just gave him a huge contract, but they do not seem to be in any rush to get Miles Sanders back involved in this offense.
And that leads to our next topic of peace or panic. And so we'll throw Miles Sanders in that conversation. But before we do that segment, we got a comment from a listener on a trade question. So PPR league, should I trade DeAndre Swift and Terry McLaurin for Travis Etienne? I would say no. I'm not giving up a solid running back, solid wide receiver for a little bit of an upgrade. Travis Etienne has been better than Swift overall, and Etienne's having an awesome season. But my big concern with him is, can he handle the whole season? And so to put all my eggs in that basket and then give up a McLaurin who's been very solid for sure. I have him on one of my teams. Now we'll see if Dotson, if this carries on after this big breakout performance for this season. But I still like McLaurin moving forward. So no, I would not do that trade.
I would agree. Typically, I love 2-for-1 trades where you're giving up 2 lesser players to get the best player in the deal, which I think ETN is the best player involved in this deal right now. So if you have a lot of depth on your lineup and, you can afford to lose McLaurin, if you have, 3 really good receivers and he's your wide receiver 4 or somehow, then I would make the deal. But, if this is a stretch where, you're going to get ETN and now you're picking up a guy off waivers to start in your flex, I would instead rather have Swift and McLaurin. But either way you look at it, I think the value is fair on both sides. You do raise concerns with, can ETN continue this pace and handle a workload for the rest of the season? But then we've also seen the same thing from DeAndre Swift getting, injured in the middle of seasons in the
Very
past.
true.
So I think there's question marks on both sides about durability.
Yeah, the difference is Philly's not necessarily riding DeAndre Swift. I mean,
Right.
Jacksonville's riding Travis Etienne. Tank Bigsby's barely getting in there. Etienne got a little banged up on Sunday. Bigsby does go in there. What does he do? He fumbles. So that was very frustrating. But because I've got Bigsby, I'm kind of, not that I'm rooting for the Etienne injury, because I have Etienne as well. I like Etienne in another league. But I think Bigsby at some point will get an opportunity this season. And that, again, like we've said, that offense, a lot of weapons. They're winning. They're a good team. You still want Jacksonville players when you can get them. But as far as 2-for-1 deals, I'm not doing that until like the week before, or maybe right at the trade deadline in your league. I'd wait until the very last minute, because I want depth through the bye weeks, through the injuries, see where you stand at the end of the year, and then you go all in with a starting lineup for the 3 weeks of the playoffs. That's what you want at that point. But at this point, I want depth. All right, let's do some peace or panic. Tony Pollard, peace or panic. 12 rushes for 53 yards, not very involved in the offense. And this offense is lighting it up, at least in recent weeks. Shout out to Luke, Cowboys fan. But I've loved Tony Pollard over the years. I wanted to see him more out there. We're seeing more of him, but really less of him. It's not working out with kind of his role in this offense this season. So I would say there's definitely panic, a high level of panic. What about you?
I would say there's a high level of panic as well, because even though he's getting the touches and he's involved, it's the type of touches that he's getting. What's made him so great in the past is, throwing him a screen pass, getting him out in space, giving it to him on a reverse. These plays that really utilize his athleticism and explosive ability, where he can break off a 50-yard run. Pollard's still getting like 14 touches a game, but it's a 4-yard run right up the middle. They're not using him in the passing game. They're not using him in any creative ways. It's just sort of, okay, we lost Ezekiel Elliott. We're now going to have you play the Ezekiel Elliott role, where just get us 4 or 5 yards up the middle, and that's okay. But that's not okay for fantasy, and that's completely underutilizing what he is capable of in this Dallas offense. So I would say I'm very concerned, just because we haven't seen an effort for them to actually use him the way he should be used.
I always love the backup running back. So Rico Dowdle, is it? So that's who I've got on 2 rosters. So I think he's worth having, rostering, and he may get an opportunity at some point as well to mix in that Dallas offense. So still love Pollard, but man, I'm panicked. This is not clicking. All right, let's talk about a couple teams where there's a certain level of panic, and we'll start with the San Francisco 49ers, because they've lost 3 in a row. Now, fantasy-wise, CMC still finds the end zone. He's still a cheat code. But there are some concerns with San Francisco. So I will say that I'm still at peace. I understand they've lost 3 in a row. If you ask me today who's going to the Super Bowl, I'll still say San Francisco and Kansas City. And they both came off a loss. And who do you want in the fantasy playoffs? You want Mahomes and Kelsey and even Rashee Rice, and if for the 49ers, you want Ayuk, you want CMC, you'll be fine. And Kittle, you're good to go. So I'm not going to panic there. What about you?
I'm not panicking either. I mean, San Francisco has so many weapons. They have one of the best offensive coaches, if not the best offensive coach in the NFL. I mean, we were anticipating for Brock Purdy to never lose a game in his career, apparently, because he's lost 3 games now, and everyone thinks that he shouldn't even be starting and they should go to Sam Darnold instead. So I think we should pump the brakes a little bit. Brock Purdy is not Tom Brady right now. Like, he's going to have some growing pains, especially as he gets further into his career and teams sort of figure out what the 49ers are doing. But I think the 49ers will be able to respond. They will be great for the rest of the fantasy season.
The other team, the Minnesota Vikings, of course, they won. They've been playing much better. Kirk Cousins, torn Achilles, out for the year. Where do we come out on Vikings players? So I told you, hey, I think Cam Akers is still the guy. Jordan Addison, been lighting it up. TJ Hawkinson, monster game. Does this continue? What's your level of panic?
I'm pretty panicked because, from a logical standpoint, there is no reason why they should try to win another game for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
Kirk Cousins is hurt. His contract's up at the end of the year. This is a great QB draft class. Get a top pick, get your QB of the future. Justin Jefferson should not play another snap for the entire season if I'm the GM, because he is so important to the future of the team. And for what? For them to go 6-10, maybe put him back on the field? Doesn't make any sense. However, I'm not completely convinced that that is the case, because they are 4-4. They were a playoff team last year, so they have a little bit of delusion that maybe they could possibly do it again. I would not be shocked if they made a trade for a Jacoby Brissett or a Marcus Mariota or a backup quarterback, thinking, okay, maybe if we can do what the Jets are doing right now, we can sneak into the playoffs. I'm not saying they should do that. And if they don't make a move at the trade deadline today, then I think you should sell everyone on the Vikings that you have. But I wouldn't do it quite yet. I would wait 24 hours at least to see if they make a move and then make the decision.
That's probably
But if they don't bring anyone in, I think you trade Jefferson, you trade Addison, you trade Hawkinson, a lot of sons on that team for whatever you can get. Madison
good.
as well.
I'm Swedish, so I'm Johnson. So Minnesota Vikings, I guess they got the Suns, so that makes sense. Yeah, I would panic. I don't want Minnesota players other than Cam Akers, because I just feel like he'll get some dump offs and be more involved in the offense. So that's the extent of that. All right, let's. Here's an interesting one. I feel like he's made it on the Peace or Panic a couple times, but Bijan, don't call him Dijon, Robinson. So he goes 11 carries, 62 yards. He does get into the end zone, but people drafted him top 10, top 5. And here's the key: 0 receptions. That's where the panic is. Now, we got to kind of figure out where the quarterback situation lands. Desmond Ridder doesn't appear to be the ultimate answer. I'm a Taylor Heineke guy. Get him out there. Let him play. Let him run around and get things going a little bit. So I would still... I'm leaning toward Peace, because we know the talent's there with Robinson. We know he's shown us what he's capable of. Can he last the whole season? Is he going to win a championship for you? I would panic in regard to that. But I think Heineke gives you some hope. What about you?
I agree. I think Heineke's definitely the better option there in the offense. We've seen him support fantasy players in Washington before. I was never a big Desmond Ridder believer. It was always my impression that Taylor Heineke would get the starting job at some point. We saw him take over this weekend. He looked good enough to be a starting quarterback. So I would have a little bit of faith in Bijan getting better. I think the only thing with Bijan is that he is so game script dependent, and the Falcons are going to do something every game differently depending on what advantage they feel like they can expose. If it's, we're not going to give Bijan a single catch because we think the tight end has a better matchup, then they're going to get it to the tight end. If it's, we like Bijan in this game, we're going to give him 6 receptions now and only 5 carries, then that's what they're going to do. So I think there's a pretty solid baseline of him being involved every game, but I don't think you'll get that game where it's 20 carries with 5 receptions and he has a huge week, just because they're trying to use him in the best way possible and not overuse him.
Yeah, so if that is the case, and Tyler Algier continues to get some carries and they keep him fresh, but is Atlanta going to be pushing for a playoff berth at the end of the season? I don't know. I'm a little worried if Bijan is set up to give you playoff success. So he may be a trade candidate for you. I think that's something to consider. Speaking of trades, we just got a comment saying Jefferson and Lockett for Adam Thielen and Nico Collins. I would probably say yes. I mean, Lockett's been playing pretty well, but then we saw NJS score a touchdown, and he looks good. So he may emerge and get even more involved in that offense. But they got a good offense, no question about it. They stole a win, didn't they, on Sunday? But I would take that trade. I'd want Thielen and Nico Collins. Those are 2 of my guys. So those are guys on my roster for sure.
So, it feels wrong to say take that trade, considering Jefferson was the number 1 overall pick and Thielen was Lockett was like a 4th round pick, and then Thielen and Collins went undrafted in some leagues. Like, that feels so crazy to say that you should take that trade. But I agree. You probably should take that trade. You know what you're going to get from Thielen for the rest of the year. You pretty much know what you're going to get from Nico Collins. You're getting 2 number 1 receivers and granted worse offenses than Seattle and Minnesota. But now that Minnesota doesn't have Kirk Cousins, we have no idea what their offense is going to be. We don't really know what Lockett's role is going to be in Seattle. So the potential of Jefferson and Lockett's definitely higher, but you're trading a lot of question marks for 2 sure things in Thielen and Collins. So if you're trying to make the playoffs and you just, want to get by until then, I would do the deal for Thielen and Collins.
There you go. So yeah, any other comments or questions from a trade standpoint? You can leave your comments wherever you're watching: YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Glad to have you a part of the show today. All right, let's get to our waiver wire segment. And we ask Harrison if he is legit. We'll talk about a number of players here. And then we'll also rely on Mark Wahlberg to help us with this segment as well. So let's go through a couple names, guys that got into the end zone this week. Are we rushing out to get them on the waivers? Are they legit? Let's begin with the Chargers, who, injury to Joshua Palmer opened up the door for Simi Fioco for a touchdown.
Come on, seriously, who is that? Come on, are you going to tell me who that is?
I don't think that's the guy. Now, the guy that you do want in LA could be Quentin Johnson. Quentin Johnson?
Yeah.
For some reason, I was going to say Quentin Jammer. That's a former, in their secondary with the San Diego Chargers. So Quentin Johnson looked really good. They were feeding him the ball early, and we've been waiting for him to take that step, like we talked about in the breakout segment, making the leap. 5 catches, 50 yards. It wasn't the full breakout, but he's the guy you probably want to go and target if he's still available on waivers, which I find him to be in a couple of my leagues. But Simi Fioco, is he legit?
He is not legit. And I agree. Quentin Johnson is someone who should be picked up in every single league right now because we haven't seen it yet, but the potential there is extremely high for him in this Chargers offense. This is a Chargers team that has not been very good so far this season, but we know that they have playoff aspirations nonetheless. They're going to be throwing a lot in games. They're going to be trying to put up points and compete as the season comes down the line. And if Johnson's the number 2 receiver there, he's going to be heavily involved in the offense.
All right, so I mentioned his name a couple weeks ago, but we're going to mention him again because he got into the end zone. He actually got into the end zone twice, but only one counted. Darrington Evans, Chicago Bears running back.
Come on, seriously, who is that? Come on, are you going to tell me who that is?
Oh, yeah, former App State Mountaineer. Let's go. I got his autographed helmet right here from the Titans. Now he's with the Bears. So he gets in, 4 rushes, 18 yards. Now, your Bears, Harrison, not a great performance on Sunday night against the Chargers. So Roshan Johnson, 6 carries, 21 yards. Deontay Foreman following up his monster performance. Yikes. 9 for 34. But Darrington Evans, and we'll just kind of throw out any of these running backs in Chicago. Anybody legit?
No, I don't think anyone is legit in Chicago outside of DJ Moore and Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet has put together a pretty nice season in Chicago. I think he had 10 catches this week, which is huge for a tight end. But yeah, I don't want any of the running backs in Chicago. This is a 3-headed committee. I don't think any of these guys are going to get more than 15 carries for the rest of the season. Probably it will probably be a 8, 6, 7 split along the way. Plus, then Khalil Herbert should be coming back in a week or 2 as well. So we'll see how he works in. Chicago's backfield is just a mess. The whole team is a mess. I don't want to touch any of them because I don't think there's any week that I would start any of them in my lineup. Like, yes, you may have weeks where Darrington Evans finishes as like the RB20 or Foreman finishes, RB13. But you're not going to have him in your starting lineup. So use that bench spot on someone else who could maybe have a true breakout, like one of the rookies that we've mentioned, instead of a guy where, he's going to score 3 points one week, 15 the next. I'm not going to start him either way because I don't want to get burned.
Yeah, I know. I started Foreman this week. It was a letdown. So I think I'm moving him to the bench. Can't trust him. All right, let's run through a couple names. These are random guys that got into the end zone. Let's go to Carolina. Tommy Tremble.
Come on, seriously, who is that?
Touchdown, 2 receptions, 4 yards. Carolina Panthers tight
Come on, are
end.
you gonna tell me who that is?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I like Tommy, but he's not going to be consistent. You still got Hayden Hurst there, so not so much. How about in Miami, Cedric Wilson?
Come on, seriously, who is that?
1 reception, 1 yard, 1
Come on,
touchdown.
are you gonna tell me who that is?
I actually like Cedric a lot. He was good in Dallas. He was like the 3rd wide receiver there. He goes to Miami as a free agent. I thought, man, he's going to really emerge there. He's been buried behind all these other studs. And so I was glad to see him out there, but there's just not enough opportunity there. But he is a name to remember because there is some talent there. No question about it. All right. Last one. Andre Isosivas, 1 reception, 1 touchdown, Bengals wide receiver from Princeton.
Come on, seriously, who is that? Come on, are you gonna tell me who that is?
Any of those guys legit?
I would not say that any of those guys are legit. I don't like going after the one random touchdown performance because it's most likely not going to happen again the next week. Sometimes it does with, Taysom Hill having touchdown every single week. He's no longer a touchdown vulture. He's just the guy that scores touchdowns for the Saints.
Correct.
But yeah, I would not go after any of those guys. I don't think it's worth it. One guy, though, who you did not mention, who I really like on waivers this week, is Demario Douglas, wide receiver for the New England Patriots. I've been in on Kendrick Bourne all season. I know you haven't, but Kendrick Bourne has put together a really nice year so far for the Patriots. The only problem is he got injured this week and he is now out for the season. And Demario Douglas has stepped into his role in the offense and has had 13 targets and 9 catches over the last 2 weeks. His snap share has increased. I think he could be something in the New England offense. I don't think he's going to be incredible, but if he comes out this week, I could certainly see him getting, 7 catches for 80 yards and being their number 1 type receiver there, because who else is going to do it? Is it going to be Devontae Parker? No. Is it going to be Juju Smith-Schuster? No. I think the young guy's going to get a chance, and he will put together a few solid weeks for the rest of the season. He's a flex play. I would put him in and pick him up. And then one other guy as well who got an opportunity this week because of injury that I'm convinced is going to be good for the rest of the season is Khalil Shakir on the Buffalo Bills. With Dawson Knox out, we saw, we thought that was going to lead to a lot more Dalton Kincaid production than it has. But what it also led to was a lot more 3 wide receiver sets on the field for the Bills instead of 2 tight end sets. And Shakir is the 3rd wide receiver in that offense. He got a 65% snap count this week, and he produced with that playing time 6 catches for 92 yards. And I know it's a small sample size, but we've only seen this from him once before as a starter last year. And when in the one game he started last year, he had 3 catches for 75 yards and a touchdown. This is a guy who has talent. He just needs to be able to be on the field and show it. And now he has the opportunity with the Dawson Knox injury. We know things have not really gone Buffalo's way, the last few weeks with the offense. They're looking for some sort of spark. I think Shakir could be that guy and is certainly someone you should pick up and consider starting in your flex as well.
I think so too. I think the talent's there. Absolutely. And the problem with Buffalo is it seems like their guys are up and down. So there's not a ton of consistency, but we know that they are capable of having huge offensive outputs, especially when you got to go up against the Dolphins and some of these teams in the AFC. They're going to have to put up points, no question about it. But yeah, as far as who really to target this week, I think Quentin Johnston is definitely one of those guys that you got to go after. And then backup running backs. I say it every week, but load up on some of these guys. Kendre Miller, keep an eye out for him. Jamal Williams has done nothing in New Orleans. Tank Bigsby, Rico Dowdle in Dallas. So those are some of the guys you got to really target on waivers. Also, Gerald Everett, he's injured, tight end, Chargers. His backup, Donald Parham, he comes in and scores touchdowns. That's all he does. So he's worth a spot start at tight end if you're desperate. I would definitely keep an eye out for him. All right, here we'll wrap up with this. Here's what I'm convinced of. Keep an eye on and don't give up on Jaleel McLaughlin in Denver. All right. He only had 4 carries, but for 33 yards. He is a big play running back in Denver. Javonte Williams got into the end zone. I think it was a catch. He had a good game. He's very good. But you want the backup there because Javonte Williams, has he stayed healthy for a whole season? No. So McLaughlin's shown what he's capable of. Denver's going to need the running game, especially down the stretch. They're still trying to, turn things around there. Do not drop him. Do not put him on the bench, or he's probably on your bench. Do not drop him to waivers. The other running back to add to this list of guys that you want on your roster, Zach Charbonnet, 5 carries, 53 yards, 2 other catches. He actually had more snaps than Kenneth Walker. And I love Kenneth Walker, but is he going to be healthy the whole season? Chances are not. I think he even got a little banged up the other day. So Charbonnet, oh yeah, be ready. Be ready for a breakout at some point. So those are a few names to remember, and keep those guys on your rosters. And I know during the bye weeks, it's tough to hang on to everybody. You got to make some tough choices, but if you can, those are some running backs to keep an eye out for. I'm convinced of it. All right, there you go. Harrison, great show. Appreciate you. Thanks everybody for listening, commenting, and great to have you a part of the show today. I'm Bryce. I'm a fantasy manager who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected, and through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well, and I hope you'll join me as we live life as sports fans who follow Jesus together. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast.